Welcome back, listeners, to the Biz Blend podcast. I'm your host, Sada. Now, for this episode, we are talking about something a lot of us secretly hate. You know what? It's work life balance. I mean, that phrase sounds nice, but for most people, it just turns into guilt and exhaustion. You are trying to lead, build, show up for your people, yet it feels like you're failing in at least one area no matter what you do. So instead of chasing a perfect split, we are going to talk about integration, how your personal and professional life can actually support each other, not compete for scraps of your time. And to dig into this, I am joined by a guest who is a clinical psychologist, advisor, speaker, and entrepreneur who has spent nearly 2 decades helping ambitious leaders navigate messy real life with clarity and purpose. No therapy couch, just straight talk on impact, legacy, and how you show up in every sphere of your life. Listeners, meet my incredible guest, Lani Jones. Lani, welcome to BizPlan, and it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited for our conversation.
Absolutely. And Larry, I mean, it's such a huge myth, work life balance. I mean, it's like overtossed and talked about. However, when put into execution, I think even the best performing ones or the most sorted ones would also kind of, find it challenging. And I also believe that to begin with, like if we want to bust the myth here, one one thing, you know, when we hear this phrase, my question to you is, Larry, what is the biggest myth that you see ambitious leaders buying into?
That it actually exists because especially in this day of social media. And so it's the constant comparison game. And we're seeing everyone's life highlight reel and looking at them and looking at our peers and thinking, "Oh, it looks like they have it figured out. Oh, it looks like they're doing it. So shouldn't I be able to do the same thing? Shouldn't I be operating in that same manner?" And I think too, um, one of the other myths of it is that it's actually gonna be helpful to you personally and professionally. And so I make the case that, hey, actually it can negatively impact your career, but also on the flip side, it can negatively impact your personal life as well.
Hmm, that makes sense. Langi, if we dropped the word balance completely, what language would you prefer leaders use instead? And why do you think? I mean, how it can shift? How this wording shift in wording actually would matter for how leader make decisions?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Language matters to us and how we even process a word, sit with a word. It's impacted by our lived experiences, by our unique identity. And so some people, we go through and say, okay, how do you feel about this word or this word? Because there's already preconceived notions about a word. So some of the language that I often use with clients is words like alignment, because we aren't seeking that. Balance by definition is an equality. It's an equal distribution. And so we're really looking at, okay, how is my life aligned with what I say is most important to me? Or it could be that integration, as you already alluded to, of instead of looking at things as 50-50, looking at, okay, are they in the correct proportions? Because oftentimes another word I use with clients is the word seasons. Sometimes you just have to go all in on a season of life. Like if you are not fully focused at work, there might be a big client project that's due. There might be an emergency you have to do. You might be up in a startup phase. And if you don't go all in on that season, there can be a lot of adverse consequences. But then, same on your personal life. If you're in a caregiving role, either for an aging parent or for children, or you have a partner with a chronic health condition, sometimes you just have to show up there. That's what's needed most in that season. And so, yes, we really talk about rhythms of seasons. We talk about alignment, integrating. And so it's not an either or. Usually it's a both and situation.
Mm, that also makes sense. Something which I have learned, because for me also it was a huge myth, before even I started looking into this. And of course, credit due to all the conversation that I've had the opportunity on this blend with so many leaders, talking about that yes, work-life balance is a huge myth, but then let's focus more on a kind of a harmony to be created between both of these worlds. And secondly, Lani, I've seen like many and especially high performers, sometimes even, managers or leaders, like 6, 7 months of absolute laser focused work. And then 2 months, it's completely like, they are ill or, they are completely like into that vacation mode. I mean, is it like there's a standard template or it depends on person to person, like based on their priorities or their preferences or options?
I think it's definitely unique to the individual. There's so many great voices out. We can always go read another business book or consume another podcast. And so, really, one of the first steps with my clients is for them to get self aware. Like, how do they work best? What is needed? What makes them happiest? How do they define success? Because if they're constantly looking to a mentor from afar or someone who seems to have figured it all out, like that's when they often get frustrated. And so figuring out, okay, for me, how do I need to operate? Because even when we look at just different businesses, some businesses have really distinct seasons. Even when I was in clinical practice and doing a lot of evaluations with children and adolescents, like my private practice was really tied to a school season from kind of that August to May time, because that's when it was most evident that there were some difficulties going on, evaluations were needed. Whereas then summer came along and kids were out of school. And so parents were taking a breath. And so I knew my summers got quiet a lot more than during the school year. And so each business too has its season. And so you mentioned, they're running for 6 to 7 months and then almost a letdown, both positive or negative, to take a break. And so, really looking at not only what is like your business flow in your year, but also what is your family or your personal life flow too, and how do those match up or not match up? So, how are you needing to make adjustments for both of those respective seasons to help integrate them better?
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Now, another, I think this is such an important aspect here. Like, you, we cannot be like, 10 out of 10 parent, partner, friend, or founder every single day. So, as you mentioned about integration, like integrating personal and professional life, how do you help, or guide leaders face the hard truth about trade-offs, without sugarcoating it?
Yeah, great question. I think every business owner or parent out there is trying to figure that out themselves and what that looks like. And so some of the first steps are we get really clear on your mission, your vision, your values. And oftentimes I think that lingo can kind of get an eye roll. It's, the 1 day workshop you have in the workplace and everyone gets on board and they're like, yeah, this is amazing. But then 3 weeks later, they've totally forgotten about it. And so it actually matters because it gives you your roadmap of where you're going. And so when you get to the point and have to make those hard decisions of, do I say yes? Do I say no? Either personally or professionally, it then becomes a question of, does this align with my values? Does this align with where I say I'm going, with where I want to go? And so that decision making also gets a lot easier when you have the clarity of knowing what's important and what you're trying to do in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is practical actually. And um, because what I feel I really appreciate that, there is no fantasy here that is getting sold. Like, everybody gets this 100% of, us all the time. Like,
Right. Mhm.
strategic choice, which is aligned with what actually matters most in that season, that you mentioned. I think it can be like a tough, it's tough to swallow, but I think it's way more honest than pretending that, I can be fully available to everyone 24/7.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we're all humans and we have limitations. We need sleep. Now, that sleep could be highly variable from one person to another. But yeah, you see the people running hard and then they get sick the moment their body lets down, or relationships are suffering, the business is suffering, and having just the reality of we were not created to do it all. Like, we have 24 hours in a day, every single one of us. There are 7 days in a week. We're all operating on the same calendar. And so, part of that is an acceptance of, okay, with the time I do have, because when we get stuck in that mindset of we should be above that, oftentimes we're setting ourselves up for frustration or unmet expectations, down the road.
Exactly. Exactly. And also, can you give like an example, like, maybe from your own life, because you are also performing so many roles out there as an advisor, as a coach, as an entrepreneur, um, or maybe a client who had to disappoint someone in one area of life to honor priority in another. Like, what did healthy integration look like in that moment?
Mhm. I worked with an executive who had gotten to the C-suite and she was about a year in, and this had been her entire goal. She was mid-30s, everything she had done in her career, the mentor she sought out, the promotions was for this end goal, and she was just very unhappy. And she's like, "Is this it? Like this is what I've been working for?" And so really, by the end of our time together, we worked together for about 18 months. Nothing significantly had changed. She was still in the C-suite. She still had 2 young kids at home, was married, but the thing we focused on was really making her yes sacred and her no strategic. And so we started with a clear calendar audit because your calendar doesn't lie. You might say one thing's important to you, but if you're spending your time in a different way, it tells the truth on that. And so we have really dug deep into that and looked at, okay, what is on your calendar out of obligation? Or what is on there because you felt you should do it? Or this is what a good wife or mother does, or this is what a successful C suite executive does. And another theme I find amongst my clients is they kind of forget how much agency they do have. And so even within her C-suite role, she had a lot more agency than she was exercising over her schedule, over her daily routines and daily rhythms. And so when we started getting clear on the yeses and nos of what went on the calendar, yeah, especially on the personal side of things, people got disappointed, or even within the office that she wasn't as readily available 24/7 because she needed the deep work time or she had to prioritize, um, what came first so that she was getting things done in a more timely fashion. And so actually people started adjusting and they will. It's always difficult when you put new boundaries in place. But yeah, it's uncomfortable when other people say they're disappointed in us or get upset with us. And so it's definitely a learning curve to start putting some of those boundaries and some of those schedule shifts in place.
Hmm. Especially something which I really, really personally connected with this, this once we start, as let's say, if I were in her place, I would also have that, kind of fear of losing that control or, quote unquote authority that, people generally they have this perception in their mind that anyone who is sitting in that position, in the leadership position is bound to have that much, control or maybe some kind of, expectations in terms of availability or, always I can, be reached out if there is any problem. But I think that fear is it's so like original. It's so common, because and I think that's why, w- like I would tend to kind of, ignore that and, just be in that same place because I have that fear that's kind of, like keeping me in that box or that cage.
Yeah, that's totally common. And I think when we actually dig into some of the psych research and literature on how people's perceptions impact our availability on our calendar or our decision making, or if we're asking for favors, it can definitely come across initially as, oh no, like I'm not going to seem like I'm all in or totally committed. But when you get very structured and you get very clear on here's where when I'm available, why I'm available at that time, those types of things, and have clear boundaries,
Mm,
actually that garners a lot more respect from people because
mm,
they perceive you as, oh, they've got it more together, or they're more in control, or they're more confident, or there's also a more of a trust piece there
mm,
too when there is that clarity versus when someone just has all of this openness, you can dump in anytime almost, um, then that actually can be seen as a negative thing. And so, yeah, it is one of those small shifts, but actually can be a very positive shift in your peers, your colleagues' perceptions.
exactly. I agree. I agree. Um, and you also work with leaders, who are used to tracking metrics, revenue, headcount, by
Yep.
God, usual suspects. Um, where do you see emotional bandwidth showing up as this, invisible KPI? And also what would happen or what happens when leaders ignore that data point?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think just in the last few years or even from COVID era, in the last 5, we are starting to see a lot more recognition of the importance of, emotional intelligence, or we call it EQ, and I always reiterate with my leaders, like, you can't lead others well until you lead yourself well. And so you have to have some level of self-awareness of like, what are your triggers? Is there something from your lived experience, your childhood that when a certain employee says or does something, you get a little bent out of shape a little quicker than you need to, or you are less patient with someone, or there's something else that just isn't quite in line. And so that awareness first for yourself so you can show up as your best leader, but then also the awareness of, hey, when I'm actually tuned in and consider this as like, a key metric, how my employees are doing emotionally, that actually positively impacts the bottom line. Um, I think slowly the conversation's moving above and beyond just, give them a fidget toy or give them ice cream on a Friday afternoon, to make them feel good and have self-care and self-help and all those things. But actually, okay, how am I creating an environment that's getting the best out of my employees? And so some businesses I work with initially, I'm like, okay, there's a financial piece to this that's going to positively or negatively impact your bottom line. And so if you aren't quite on board with why should I care about this so much? Let's just talk it in numbers, because that's a true impact and metric.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I think what I understand is like, you can be hitting your numbers while, also quietly and it's such such kind of, an interesting thing that, you instantly don't realize that. Like, it like quietly drains that battery and it actually produces those numbers. Like short term, it does look like high performance, but when you look at it, look at the bigger picture from a long term perspective, it looks like an in total collapse. So, I mean, there should be like, this idea of treating rest, boundaries, or support, or this pause as a part of the operating system strategically, not like a perk that, you earn after surviving another quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the things when we talk about just the awareness of that metric or how are your employees doing, it's not that you have to go spend a lot more money or take a lot more time. It's the little things of how are you interacting with them throughout the day? How are your evaluation processes and feedback processes set up? Are you being clear in your communication? And so it's because the first question is, well, how much is this going to cost me and how much time is it going to take? And so actually, it's not once you train yourself to look for and make just little changes, even in how you're communicating, can have really significant impact.
Exactly. Yeah. And listeners, as you all know that, on Discipline, we do not talk only about the status quo or the challenges or the problems, but we also try to bring up solutions here. So, Lani, um, you help people not just succeed, but turn that success into legacy. It's a big question, before we wrap up, but um, what do you think are the non-negotiable design principles of a life, that would actually scale? Like if a leader genuinely wants to integrate life and business here.
Mhm. First step is getting clear on what you want. Like, what is your definition of success? Because oftentimes, when we start peeling back the layers and really looking at that, people are little surprised about what they find because they wouldn't have consciously said, oh, this is my definition of success. But based on their lived experience, that's how they're operating. That's how they're behaving out of that manner. And so in order to start integrating, you have to figure out somehow of what is most important to me. And so don't go at this alone. If it's a colleague, a mentor, a business coach, a life coach, a therapist, if that's the season you're in, find someone to help walk you through this, or even your partner. Ask them, work with them, say, hey, where do you think I need to make some changes? Or how are we operating as a unit together? What are we saying is most important about our family? And take a little time just to gather some data, to look at your calendar too. Your calendar is full of data and start figuring out, okay, what's important to me? What do I really want? And then you can start developing that action plan and figuring out, okay, how can I better integrate and start architecting this legacy that's all encompassing. That's not just, work isolated over here, family over here, but where I'm acting in more unison.
Mm, mm. So, also, Lani, if listeners, especially all the leaders, CEOs, or anyone who is in a leadership position, or they just want to simply understand, how they can get a head start with this. If they would like to reach out to you or share their thoughts with you, what's the easiest way to do that?
Yeah, they can head to my website. It's drlanijones.com /reset. I have a free guide to help you take that first step in getting the clarity in auditing your calendar and figuring out where do I go from here. Then if they're like, hey, I'm ready for someone to help walk me through this, they can reach out to me through there as well. And I'd be happy to speak with them further.
Wonderful. Listeners, what I'm going to do for all of you is have all these links and details. So just hover over to the show notes along with this episode on whichever platform you listen to your podcast to. And well, as we land this conversation, listeners, I just want to zoom out for a second. We started with a myth, that if you just crack the code on work life balance, everything will like magically feel calm, whole, clean, and tidy. But what we heard today is almost the opposite. Real life, it's messy. It is. Real leadership is messy. Integration is not a color coded calendar, it is a set of choices, trade offs, and stories that you tell yourself about what those choices mean to you. Well, you might not be able to control your workload this quarter, or your family responsibilities, or the demands on your time, but at least you can control the framework that you're using. So, thank you so much, Nani, for such a grounded conversation and for reminding us that, our impact is not just measured in revenue or titles.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to connecting with all your listeners more.
Absolutely. So, listeners, okay, here is your Bisblend challenge. Do not ask, how do I get more balance this week? Ask, where can I integrate one thing better on purpose? Maybe one boundary, one honest conversation, one system that supports you instead of draining you. And please do subscribe to us and let us know your thoughts about this conversation and share this episode with a colleague who always jokes about burning out next quarter. Thank you for tuning into this episode. This is your host, Sana, and you have been listening to Bisplent. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.